Communism works in very small scales. And that's because a very small scale commune is a ideologically homogenous group of people that have all agreed on how they want to live and what they do. And even then, there's still some challenges. But you can't scale it up because there's one famous commune. They have 100 open slots. If someone leaves, someone can apply to join, and they let you come in. Everything's shared. But it's still controlled by a committee. There's still people who are hierarchical in control of it and can choose to let you in or not. The challenge is when you try scaling up something like communism, it utterly fails because ideology starts to become more and more disparate as you move away from the central hub. So I'll explain it this way. If you have a city, a cultural center that has, like Broadway, for instance, people are sharing ideas, they're producing similar culture and content. You see an emergent phenomenon of different styles of art emerging, but it all swirls around certain ideas. The further out you get away from that hub, the less people are a part of that culture. Now you're hundreds of miles away, now you're thousands of miles away, and now they don't even speak the same language. You can't have a single system where those people agree with each other. We're seeing this in the US. People in cities view the world one way, people outside of cities view it another way. Somebody who's living in rural Nebraska is for some reason in an argument over gun control with someone who lives in the heart of New York City, where they're completely different worlds. One guy walks outside and he sees mountains and nothing else, or fields of corn. And he's like, wait, who am I hurting by having an AR-15? Then there's a guy who's in New York City surrounded shoulder to shoulder with tons of people everywhere. And he's like, if someone fired a gun, it would cause chaos and mayhem. They're not even arguing the same world and they don't realize it. So this is a huge component of the problem we're facing here in the US, particularly with cities versus rural areas. That seems to be the big split component. Long story short, my point is, if everybody had a shared ideology, there'd be no problems. People would all just get along and agree. They'd be like, oh yeah, that's the thing. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because a lot of the communist intellectuals that they like to cite, like Peter Kropotkin, for example, if I recall correctly, when he was writing his treatises, he was talking about like communes of like 100 people. And like you said, it's like, yeah, that could probably work. But when you scale to this level, or even like with the USSR, a large reason that they collapsed was because of the different ethnicities that they had all under this one flag. And I think it can go both ways. I think politics can be downstream from culture, but I think culture can also be downstream from politics. Like, for example, with the USSR, I mean, that was an Orthodox Christian country, and you had the Bolsheviks come in and they forced in communism and they killed the Tsar, and they implemented that to a population that didn't want it.
You mean Russia was Christian and then the Bolsheviks came in and turned it into the Soviet Union?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, or even like with gay marriage, for example, California, arguably the most liberal state in the country. They shot that down in, I think, 2008 as a state.
Right.
7 years later, Barack Obama, takes credit for the Supreme Court legislating from the bench, saying this is now what we're doing.
Funny.
And now, 7 years later, you look at where we are now. So there is this sort of assumption from the population, which I understand, that sort of the government or the laws of the society are generally going to reflect its morality or its sentiment. And so when people saw the government doing that, the White House lit up in the rainbow flag, I think it did kind of influence the culture. Like, oh, this is what we're doing. This is what normal people think. And that sort of opened up the floodgates for everything that we're seeing now.
And this is exactly what honest leftists have criticized me for. It's very fascinating. Typically, they just lie. And they'll lie about something because they're trying to convince people who aren't initiated into politics to join their side. But I had someone, I love this, they said, the reason they hate me, said this on Facebook, was that I shatter consensus reality. And I was like, well, thank you for being honest. They want consensus reality. That's it. They don't care what's true. They care about what is perceived as true so that everybody marches in lockstep. We are deviants. We are outside of that. And we are pulling people from it.
Yeah.
That threatens their structure.
They want superficial, diversity, not diversity of thought, which is, again, something that is very dangerous and something that is regressive and is actually going to be hurting them in the long run, especially when it comes to building any kind of society. But to add to your earlier point there, I do believe that the solution is going to be community-oriented. People coming together, setting up homeschool pods, setting up, protections, setting up community watches, being able to learn to defend themselves, being able to create farms and to share food and to share resources with people. I believe that right there is going to be a lot better. That right there is a true form of anarchy that I believe could be practiced, should be practiced, and all it takes is you guys talking to your neighbors and doing the right thing and moving away from the state, because any kind of larger state that is based on forcing people to share an ideology is, to me, a very dangerous state.
It's tough. I wish there were easier answers to all of this,
Yeah.
We have so many people who say like, hey, we just want to live in peace. We want to live in peace. But It's funny because we really do, but then you see that some ideologies just don't get along. Like in the UK, I can't remember the name of the area, there was a school doing LGBT curriculum, and Muslims came out to protest it. A member of the LGBT community comes out and says, we're doing this for you. And they were like, how dare you? How dare you claim that? And it's interesting because I've even seen these paintings where it shows a woman in hijab, but it's a rainbow. And I'm like, in the real world, they really, really are angry about this. Like in Dearborn, Michigan, where they're going to this meeting saying, do not vote Democrat because they are attacking Muslim values. These are religious conservatives. But for some reason, there's an attempt by the left to act like they're part of the same community. They don't get along. I want everybody to live peacefully. Tolerance does not mean acceptance. It means, you do your thing, I'll do mine. Let's try not to infringe upon each other. But then the problem emerges where when these communities start butting up against each other, and one community says, we find it abhorrent to do this behavior. The other community says, if you repress X behavior, you are a bigot and a tyrant. Well, now you've got a potential for conflict, and there's no simple solution like the law. It doesn't change how people feel about things. So there's no simple solution.
Yeah.
If either people have shared values or agree to live under an umbrella of certain values, or you will start seeing conflict. And what we have for the past 10 or 20 years, this push for multiculturalism, it's proposed as, here's the American umbrella of the Constitution. Underneath it, different cultures can coexist peacefully. What it's become is the umbrella of American culture has been destroyed and accused of being monstrous. And now you have different cultures all existing at the same level and targeting each other. And that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's a religion of wokeness that is destroying the fabric of society.
Yeah, and so much of, it's often very popular for conservatives to point out that the liberals were the ones who wanted free speech back in the day, but now they're the tyrants. And it's like, well, it's actually been pretty consistent insofar as they didn't have a seat at the table because this was a moral country, and then we gave them a seat at the table, and then they started promoting the worst things ever, kicking conservatives out of the institutions, and now they're like, okay, we're happy, we don't want to give you guys free speech. So we saw what happened when you grant, tolerance and things like that to people who are fundamentally like trying to destroy your whole country. And now, like, it's not enough for us to just say, okay, we'll be tolerant, private individual in the privacy of your own home, because we were tolerant. And then you see when people are embodying identities that are fundamentally disordered, whether it's the body positivity movement or LGBT stuff, they still feel a sense of like incongruence or guilt with what they're doing. And so then they project that to society, where you have grotesquely obese people who are saying, the reason I feel bad about the way I look is because of society giving me dirty looks. Or people who are maybe experiencing gender dysphoria will say, the reason I am unhappy is because of this. People like Tim Pool are being so mean to me right now, but they don't care about what you think on virtually any other issue. But the one that's most important, their whole identity, that's the one that all of a sudden they value your opinion so strongly.
It's a cult. Funny thing happened to me today. I got a phone call from some like leftist guy yelling at me. And it was funny. So what happened was I was ordering Starbucks. I'm not a big fan of Starbucks, but somebody, I think you wanted Starbucks. Is that what happened?
These are allegations. These are things.
But,
corporatist, woke, communist.
But
Not showing the cup on screen.
It's
next
strategic,
to
the strategic cup placement.
Look, I'll say it. I don't like them as a corporation, but they consistently do better. And it bothers me that's the case. But anyway, I digress. I was ordering. And so it was a big order because it was for the office. It was for everybody. And I get a phone call. And so I'm like, I never answer my phone ever. But this time I was like, they're probably calling me saying like, yo, you're nuts. You're ordering too much. But it was actually some guy just yelling at me. And he was like, why are you saying these things? And then I actually started talking to him. And I was like, the craziest thing was, I don't approach these conversations, albeit this one was by accident, but I love a good conversation with anybody. I don't care who they are, especially someone on the left. And very quickly I was like, the things you think I did aren't true. The things someone told you I said are not what I actually said. You made a mistake, and I don't blame you for that. Here's what I actually said. And then the dude was like, okay, well, he still wanted to be mad at me because there's this cult element to it. But I was like, my guy, I want LGBT people to be safe and to have their clubs and to celebrate and to drink and be merry. What I don't want is for child abusers to pretend that they're part of what is going on with people enjoying a drink in their own private adult lives to then use you as a shield. That's what I called out. And if anyone said otherwise, then they're not really listening to what I'm saying. And we shouldn't be mad at each other. We should figure out how to work together. It was an interesting conversation. Ultimately, it ended with two simple words that everybody knows, and you have to drink if I say it. because the end result was like the dude's attitude was basically like no compromise. And then I was like, okay, well, like if this is the case, then civil war is going to happen. And and then he was like, okay, and then he hung up. And he was like, I'll tell everyone you said that. I assume he was recording it, but I'm like, yeah, go for it, man. Like we want there to be no violence. We want people just to be like, okay, like, we solve this with like a game of soccer or something. Unfortunately, if people view the world so differently, it's like we had this golden age for so long in this country. I say for so long, but maybe for like 10 or 20 years, where we really didn't see the conflict that the rest of the world sees, that we fail to realize how this stuff comes to fruition. I remember watching this old show. I can't remember what it was. I was very little, so probably something in a religious class, where it was like a Christian being approached by a different religious person. It was a cartoon or something. And they said, renounce your God. And the man said, never, I won't do it. And they said, then so be it. And they like started beating him or something. And I thought that was crazy. And I was like, what? Just say yes so that like they don't beat you and kill you and take you from your family, and then let them leave, and then you can go back to believing whatever you want. And it's only now as an adult I realize why people actually feel the way they do about things like that, and why they would never back down, because ideology is strong with people who have determined there's good people, there's evil people, there's those that seek to harm and and be destructive, and they will never submit to it. And I'm like, okay, now I get war.
Yeah, the midterms, fortification aside, are really great evidence of that. Like people are very willing to accept a lower material standard of living if it means they get to think to themselves that people like us are like seething and miserable and things like that. They're willing to actually do that. And any mainstream Democrat politician can come out and say, look, I'm not a socialist. Look, I'm not a communist. And they will still be in the club. But none of them would dare say, look, I'm not in favor of all this transgender stuff. I'm not in favor of all of this worship of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm not in favor of all this mass immigration. They would get exiled for that. So in effect, that is actually what the Democrat Party, what leftism is. It is the diversity, equity, and inclusion worship. It is the transgenderism. It is all of that other stuff, the mass migration, the open borders. That is like what it is in effect, because you cannot be in that party and denounce things like that. They will kick you out for that. And so this is the problem. Like, if that is the hill that they're willing to die on, how are we supposed to reconcile that as people who more or less just want to be left alone?
There's a saying that they often say, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. And I'm like, I agree with that. Their view of it is it's a good thing that this new one world, postmodern world is growing and developing. And we view that as a bad thing. It's interesting. History will tell. It's written by the victors, and we will see. I think based on what we've seen over the past couple of years, though, somebody posted there's a viral tweet. I'm sorry, I can't remember who posted it, but they were like, it's time to stop being blackpilled. We're winning. And they posted all of these things that happened in the past 2 months that are tremendous victories for liberty, personal responsibility, meritocracy. Elon Musk is a great example. 5 years after Carl Benjamin was banned, he's back. It's crazy. I'm like, Carl is one of the first culture warriors in the culture war. And it's interesting. If back when he started making content, calling out academia and intersectional feminism, immediately political leaders were like, we identify what he's saying and it's a problem, it would have stopped in its tracks and we'd be in a very, very different future 10 years on. Now, what are we seeing? 5 years after he's banned, he's back. Elon Musk's moves are all greatly beneficial to the causes of liberty and meritocracy. And a bunch of other things, mind you. It's not just those, core principles or core ideologies or whatever you want to call them. It's a lot of victory happening. So I think, looking at the way things are going now, especially with abortion, for instance, the end result is obvious. One side is consistently saying, have kids, have kids, have kids. The other side is saying, we reserve the right not to. And I tweeted this. I tweeted, Democrats are arguing for the right not to have children or grandchildren. And it was funny because the left thought that I was saying they shouldn't have that right. I'm like, no, that's what I'm explaining this. This is what they want. Why argue against them? Why? Oh, okay. Then don't have kids. See ya. In 20 years, our kids will inherit the earth. That's just the reality. And it's not meant to be disrespectful. It's just the truth.
Yeah, the history is actually completely on our side, because any time in the 20th century, for example, that these people got a little bit too out of hand, started being really radical, being communist, there is always that sort of right-wing government that comes in and gets things more or less under control. And that's what they're afraid of. And also, we are like normal people. We are the stock of people that builds civilizations, that builds countries. These people, these wannabe leftist revolutionaries, the Antifa LARPers, these are people who are like fundamentally like in despair They can't even make eye contact with baristas when they order a coffee. These people are not going to like run the country. They're not going to run the government. Even the people running it now are far less intelligent and far less competent than the people who ushered in this sort of totalitarianism that we have now.
I've been thinking that, like we had a who said this the other day, that since Epstein died, everything's been falling apart.
Darren Beatty.
Darren Beatty said that. That's a funny point. I'm like, that's a weird thing. And how about that? But I was thinking about, I remember George H.W. Bush saying something like, we can now begin to see a new world order. And it's a reference to the liberal economic order that was created after World War II. We've talked about ad nauseum. The CFR has it on their website. They talk all about it. They're NewsGuard certified, by the way. And that's an old system. They want a new system. And I thought about, how is everything falling apart? How did Donald Trump win? And I'm like, oh, I get it. The children of these people are inept, and it's obvious. They say that wealth lasts 3 generations. Someone who is hardworking builds it, has kids who did not work hard, who inherit it, who have children themselves, the grandkids, who have no idea how to even manage the money because they weren't taught by their grandfather, and then the money evaporates.
Yeah.
The same is true for those that run the government. It's like 3 generations on, and that ability to control the system is lost to them.
Yeah, and you're seeing as things continue to decline, all of these people just emerge from the woodwork. Donald Trump, we love him. Blake Masters, Carrie Lake, all of these people who previously were not known to Republicans or conservatives, they're all like rising to the occasion, and they're very talented. They're great candidates. They're good on the issues. And it almost recalls like the founding. I mean, I was talking with your driver on the way over about George Washington. They had to beg this guy to come lead the army. They had to beg him to come be the president. He was just like a wealthy aristocratic farmer. They had to beg him, and now he's like one of the greatest probably the greatest American of all time. And you're going to see that as things continue to decline, you're going to have Americans who still exist. I mean, there are tens of millions of us. They're going to be like, you know what? I'm a very smart guy. I've been very successful in whatever practice I've chosen to pursue, but now is my time. And they're going to get involved in politics, and they are going to perform better than the people we have now. They're going to be far more popular. And I think that ultimately we will make America great again.
Well, things will also play themselves out. A lot of the people who are chemically castrated, whether by choice or by circumstance of everything else around us that was instituted by the state, they're not going to be having children. The people who are going to be having children are the people who still believe in families, still believe in marriages, still hopefully believe in having a future for this country. And those are the people that are going to be the future leaders of this country. So I have hope in that particular aspect, but then I also see a lot of the bigger problems. And this is, again, why I'm so kind of allergic to people calling for more state intervention, because just like the state could be used for some people's ideas of good, it could also be used for bad. But when you have a bigger state, you have the possibility of that pendulum swinging back even harder.
Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of the size of the state, if we're going to measure in like dollars, which I think is a pretty fair metric, in my ideal government, it would be like 1/10 the size. I mean, there's so much waste, so much patronage, rewarding friend, things like that, so much waste. So the actual size of my government, in terms of like how big it is in money, it would be significantly smaller. In terms of how it's actually like affecting your day-to-day life, also would be significantly smaller, unless you're like a groomer or a communist or something like that. But you're not. You're very fine people. You'll be fine. But this actually does vindicate your point earlier too about the alternative school choices, because leftists don't reproduce by having kids. Leftists reproduce by grooming kids. So they infiltrate, whether it's like early education or then even on social media now, and they try to poison children's minds into buying into all of this ridiculousness. And these poor conservative parents, they actually believed, perhaps naively, but we understand it, that they could still send their kids to schools and they wouldn't become indoctrinated. And now you've got these poor dads having to like argue with their children about why they don't actually own their minds, and why, because if it's not the parents that own the minds of the child, it's going to be the state,
exactly,
as you mentioned.
This is crazy to me. We've had people come here to the studio and be like, passively, we're talking, they'll be like, oh yeah, my kids, they're going to be home from college for the holiday. And I'm like, what? Do you not listen to your own commentary? Like, how do you have kids in college? Well, they'll be fine.
It depends on the school, though. Right?
I disagree.
There are good schools out there. I went to them.
Which one?
I know. I mean, Christendom College is one of them. Franciscan
name 5.
University at Steubenville. 5?
I'm kidding. No, I disagree.
Ave Maria.
I think they're all bad.
I think they're just scams.
There are good Catholic schools out there. I don't know about the rest, but I know that there are bright spots.
Fair point, I suppose. Then to clarify, I'm talking about people who are saying that their kids are going to like state universities and things like that. And I'm just like kind of shocked that they would come out and be like, look what's happening to these kids. And I'm like, bro, you're putting your kids
a lot of them say like, oh, my kid is influencing the students around them. They're the influence. they're a good influence on the students around them, and that's completely delusional.
Didn't
Yeah.
Jim Brewer do a bit about this for stand-up that went viral? Where he was like, my daughter came back from college and was calling me like an evil white man or something like that?
I believe that. I didn't see it.
Probably.
How insane.
That's
Yep.
yeah. Imagine.
Did you see the black supremacist that was speaking out against her father
Yes.
during
Yeah.
the father's funeral?
Yes.
That was disgusting. That was
Crazy.
I didn't see
shocking,
that.
and that was terrifying to see the indoctrination where, you know, a child who was raised by a father that pretty much gave her everything, gave her an Ivy League education, spent millions of dollars into making sure that she got the best education. That education turned to her during the funeral, denouncing and calling out the father as a bigot and a horrible human being.
And that's like the restructuring of values, where now the dopamine that she got from that is worth more to her than loyalty to her family. And we saw this too during the Summer of Love. These poor dads in like middle America were getting exposed and canceled on TikTok by their stupid daughters being like, he didn't post a black square. He's watching Fox News. He's racist. And they're just like, what? Where did I go wrong? I feel so badly for those men.
The dopamine from social media interactions that have an algorithm that prioritizes this, that incentivizes this, that I personally believe is controlled by the government, especially the DHS, that has a hand in what people see and what they don't see. And I think this is all being done deliberately, in my own personal opinion, for my own assertions.
John, you said you feel badly for those men, but it's like,
Oh, completely.
they've kind of wedded their daughters to the world in a way that I can't sympathize completely. You gave them a smartphone at 12 years old.
Yeah.
You sent them to public schools, and you didn't instill religious values in them or tell them that they're beautiful. It's like, what do you expect to happen?
I agree with that, but I mean, imagine like how children were being raised in like the 1920s, 1930s. You know, the boomer generation really was the first generation to be like psyoped by television into rebelling from their parents. I mean, this whole idea of like, oh, they're a teenager, they're rebelling from their parents, that is very historically new.
Yeah.
That is something that was really invented in the 20th century because, like you mentioned, they have an incentive to use technology to get into the minds of the youth and program them how they will. I feel bad in the sense that I really firmly believe that American men in the world should be able to not have to worry about if my child goes to the same school as all these other people, if they do this. I think they should still be proactive in their child's lives, but I do think it's very sad how now they have to dedicate so much time that their fathers and grandfathers would not have had to dedicate to making sure that their child doesn't end up hating them and denouncing them at their funeral.
Homeschool your kids.
Yeah.
That's become good at things. Read more. Develop a skill, have a family, homeschool your kids, all of that stuff, and that's the first thing. You know, clean up your own room before you try to change the world. But then we focus on the ballot harvesting problem. Then we focus on the neocon, and the establishment problem, and we just try to make everything gradually better. Every day you will take a single step, and before you realize it, you'll have walked 1,000 miles. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.